the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
That's a good deal. I mean, if that's what happens, the Yankees are probably going to have a really good year.
I mean, look, the Yankees season revolves around, it used to revolve around Aaron Judge and Garrett Cole. Now it revolves around Aaron Judge, Garrett Cole, and Juan Soto. So all three of those guys, full healthy seasons. Yeah, the Yankees are going to be a problem for a lot of teams.
We have some breaking news in the program, sir.
Nick Saban has unretired?
No, still retired. But the Cubs. They are in agreement, per Jesse Rogers of ESPN, with lefty Shota. Is it Imanaga, on a 4-year, $53 million deal.
Yes, I just saw the Jesse Rogers report. It's 4 years, 53, with some kind of option that can push it to 5 years, $80 million. So,
do you like this for the Cubs?
Yeah, I think it's, if you look at their depth chart pre-Imanaga, which you can always do on Fangraphs by going over to the roster resource depth charts, which I gotta say, I'm not even doing this for the yucks at this point. Like, I genuinely love roster resource and what it offers.
No, it's good. We're still pro Fangraphs on this this podcast. We'll promote them every week.
Like, the top of that rotation is solid with Justin Steele. You're a little shakier with Jamison Taillon, and then beyond that, it was Kyle Hendricks, Jordan Wicks, and a bunch of arms like guys who may not be ready yet, and Ben Brown, Caleb Killian, Hayden Wesneski, maybe a bullpen arm like Keegan Thompson or Javier Assad. You saw how many issues the Cubs had with the back of the rotation last year. Obviously, they let Marcus Stroman walk. The funny thing is, I think they've replaced him in more or less someone similar in Imanaga. For those who don't know, the second best Japanese pitcher available this offseason behind, obviously, Yoshinobu Yamamoto. The main difference being that Imanaga is 30. He does not throw particularly hard, tops out around 91, 92. Has some good secondary stuff, but nothing. I mean, the stuff is nothing on the level of Yamamoto's, but there are maybe like 5 to 10 pitchers alive who have stuff on the level of Yamamoto's. So that's obviously, that's not an insult by any stretch. And he has phenomenal control and command. You saw him pitch a little bit during the World Baseball Classic. He looked good. I think he pitched particularly against Team USA. He looked very good in that one. I think the concern you have with Imanaga is a few things. One is the age. He's already 30. You're not, these aren't peak years you're going to get. This is, the beginning of the back half for him. The second, as I mentioned, the velocity. 91, 92 is, I think usually, and I'd love to read more and study more about this, but I kind of have the personal feeling that if you're throwing under 93 on the regular, your life, like, obviously your life is just that much harder, but I think it really sets a hard ceiling for you as kind of a mid to back rotation starter, because, obviously if you throw 95 and you miss your location, you'll be okay more often than not. You miss your location throwing 91, that ball's going 450 feet. And that brings me, I think, to the biggest issue I find with Imanaga is he is a major fly ball pitcher, which worked out okay in Japan because there aren't a lot of big-time power hitters in NPB. A lot of those stadiums are rather big. Going to be more of an issue, I think, against major league hitters in Wrigley Field in particular. So I would temper my expectations. I think more likely than not, he's going to be something along the lines of a 4 ERA guy with probably about a strikeout per inning. The thing you can probably feel good about is he's never had any significant health issues, so I think you can feel positive about penciling him in for 160 to 170 innings. The command and control, like I said, will be there, so you're not going to be worried. If he's going to give up home runs, I think a good number of them are probably going to be solo shots, which you can always live with. A lot of it is obviously just going to be the adjustment period that every Japanese player has to go through, and Japanese pitchers in particular, going from a six-man rotation to a 5-man rotation. The Cubs do not have the starting pitching depth in order to do a 6-man rotation unless they want to give innings to, like I said, Assad or Keegan Thompson, or if they want to maybe do, some kind of, let's give a little bit of time to Wesneski or Brown or Killian. But I think if nothing else, Imanaga is a very good mid-rotation option, a guy who gives him some depth in a rotation that really needed it. And again, being the NL Central, Yamamoto would have been the better get by far. But, this is a Cubs team that looked pretty good up until the last 2 weeks of the season. Got a new manager in Craig Counsell, has for the most part kept the roster intact. Obviously, what they do to replace Cody Bellinger is a really big question. They haven't really answered so far. But at the same time, I like adding Imanaga. I like what he brings to that rotation, and you can't really argue with the cost. $453. I mean, that's barely $13 million a year. When Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha are pulling down $15 million, $16 million, when Lucas Giolito's getting a deal that's going to pay him $40 million if he's absolute trash, it's hard to say no to a guy like Imanaga, even if the ceiling doesn't feel that high. But we never know either, because again, it's Japanese pitchers can surprise, especially given how little we've seen of them here in the United States.
Well, it's also just like, hey, we've been wondering all offseason. We're like, hey, Cubs, what you doing? What are y'all doing? Like the NL Central is just right there. And look, I understand the Dodgers and the Braves, two juggernauts. Diamondbacks just made the World Series. What are you doing? Like, it can be done. You have a good team. There's no reason for you not to be operating at this point in your retooling, to not be going deeper, to not be spending a lot of money, to not be challenging and going for it in a weak division where you're the favorites. You should be going into next year. And look, man, baseball happens, and just you can't be scared, especially in the market like Chicago. It's time. Like, it's time for you to go all the way in. Shota is not a big 453. It's fine, but it's worthwhile. It's good. Makes the fans happy. But it's also like Cody Bellinger should just be a Cub again. Like, he was good for you. Just bring back Cody Bellinger. You're a big market team. You just bring him back. You know what you also do? You sign Rhys Hoskins, who they've been linked to. You know what else you do? And this was something like Foul Territory was talking about on their pod, where it's like, well, they're engaged. Like, what if they do all that? Because that's still in play. Like, how if they end up signing Shota here, Bellinger, Hoskins, Chapman, not Araldis, and Jordan Montgomery, I mean, that's a really, really strong offseason. That's not going to break the bank, but will add a bunch of depth and quality pieces around a good young group and a team that should be right there to win 90-ish games. I don't know. I just think that's still in play. I'm very, very curious now if this is a sign of more activity from the Cubs, because there should be activity. The Cubs fans need to be pressuring this organization. Needs more activity.
I agree with you completely. And Michael Bauman wrote this for Fangraphs back at the start of the month that, the Cubs had slow played the offseason so far, which if you're a Cubs fan, you probably don't love. But at the same time, as you just mentioned, Blake Snell's still on the market. Jordan Montgomery's still on the market. Bellinger's still on the market. Matt Chapman is still on the market. Josh Hader, for whatever reason, the Cubs want to add a bullpen piece, although they got very, very good work out of Adbert Alzolay last year. There is still room for them to make moves. And one thing Michael mentioned in particular, I think is worth noting, the Dodgers have likely spent their last offseason dollar, at least their last major offseason dollar, in getting Teoscar Hernandez.
The Braves are done too.
The Braves are done. I think it's pretty safe to say the Yankees are probably done with free agency. There aren't really many contenders still out there with either holes or money to spend. Meanwhile, the Cubs, even with adding Imanaga now, depending on how things are calculated for luxury tax purposes, obviously, still have about $40 million or so before they hit the first CBT threshold. So there's still plenty of room if they want to make even two major signings. And I think you're right. If they come out of the next month or so, you add Matt Chapman, because right now third base is being held down by Nick Madrigal, and I cannot imagine the Cubs feel
Chapman feels like a definite to me. I'm just penciling him in. That'd be weird if he does not end up in Chicago.
Or you add Rhys Hoskins to displace Matt Mervis at first base. I know Hoskins is a brutal defensive first baseman, but I think there are real questions about whether Mervis can hit enough at the major league level to make him a viable starter. Add Chapman, add Hoskins, maybe get a one more arm in there somewhere. It doesn't have to be Snell. It doesn't have to be Montgomery. I don't really know who's left beyond that, but
Stroman.
I would imagine the thing is Imanaga and Stroman are they're basically carbon copies of one another, except for the ground ball fly ball difference. Then I'm pretty sure this closes. I mean, I think the door was already closed on Stroman returning to Chicago, but I think this pretty much eliminates it. But yeah, there's still room for them to do something. And again, if Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery is still sitting there a month from now, no contract in hand, what's to stop the Cubs from going to Snell and being like, 3 years, $60-some million, rebuild your market.
You'll still be in your early to mid 30s when you leave and get one final payday.
And now you can be at the top of this rotation that at that point too would feel like a genuine NL Central favorite.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting too, like, for as much as we make fun of the NL Central, like the Cardinals, the Cardinals, Brewers, Reds, and Cubs, I think will all be somewhere in that 84 to 88, maybe even 90 win window. So
depending on what the Cubs do over the next month.
But that's what I'm saying, that it does not take a lot. It's not going to take a lot to move you out of that group. It's not like you're staring down a 95 plus win team in your division and going, well, even if we add all these guys, are we still good enough? Add one of those guys, and you might already have enough to separate yourself from the pack. Add two of those guys, you are probably definitively ahead of the pack, because we know the Brewers aren't going to make any more big moves. it's a pretty safe bet the Cardinals aren't going to do anything more
No.
at this point. Similarly with the Reds, they've already declared that they are done making major moves. So the rest of the offseason is really in the Cubs' hands as to what they want to do. You know, they can pretty easily, with just another couple moves, easily set themselves up to be the favorite in the NL Central, I think. And I think Imanaga is a good start on that process. It really feels weird, by the way, to talk about a team starting its offseason in mid-January. This has been a very strange free agency period in that regard. That so much seems to have taken so long to happen, even with Ohtani coming off the board relatively early.
Absolutely. Your old friend, though, speaking of the Cardinals, they hired Chaim Bloom this week, sir. What do you make of the Cardinals bringing in Bloom?
Sure. I mean, I like the fact that major league teams essentially have like a sinecure program for failed general managers to just be advisors or assistants or whatever it is, whatever make work title they want to give them.
Yeah.
I imagine what he will do in St. Louis is probably closer to what he was doing in Tampa Bay, which is to say probably more focused on the player development side of things, the draft side of things. That I think without question was the strongest part of Chaim Bloom's resume in Boston. I think clearly when it comes to free agency, he did not really seem to have a very strong grasp on how to operate with that.
Well, he's in a good spot for that now.
He isn't. That's the thing. He is in a good spot in St. Louis, a team that rarely bothers with free agency, that almost never goes after top targets. It prefers to do more.
Go. Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.